We'd like to welcome everyone today. We're at the Independence Public Library. This is Saturday, February 27th, and we have Samson Mah here today. Samson is being interviewed as part of a year-long series of interviews we're doing with Independence residents or people with Independence ties to raise awareness of Black, Indigenous, and people of color within our community. I'd like to ask you to go ahead and state your full name and just tell us a little bit about yourself, Samson.
Yeah, so as you said, my name is Samson Mah. I've lived here in Independence, Kansas, essentially my whole life. I am a second generation Chinese American here. My father was born and raised here in Independence, and my mother is an immigrant from China who came over.
Wow. Are you going to school now? Are you in the high school or college or?
Yes, so right now I am a current freshman here, not here actually, but up at the University of Kansas in Lawrence, and I am currently majoring in human biology on the pre-med trackway.
Wow, that sounds pretty tough.
Just a bit.
It'd take a lot of time, I bet. Were you a reader as you were growing up? Did you read or did your parents read to you?
Yeah, so I guess speaking first for my parents, as an immigrant, my mom doesn't have the strongest English skills, but my dad was very adamant about reading to me as a kid. I would say for most nights growing up, he would try to make an effort to read me, a short story before bed or something like that. And definitely growing up, I would say I was a pretty avid reader overall. I remember back in second grade, every class would get this sort of crate of books for, the class to read. And I would just tear through that sucker as quickly as possible. And, that I would say that continued for quite a few years after. I know here in Independence at the schools, they use something called AR, which is sort of this reading comprehension test. It incentivizes kids basically to read. And I remember I was, trying my hardest to get as many of these AR points as possible. And, in a way, I would say it encouraged me to read beyond what I was comfortable to. Some of the higher ticket books were things that maybe I wouldn't have considered reading otherwise.
Wow, that's interesting. Was there any particular book that you really enjoyed or that was influential or inspired you that you remember?
I think that might be two separate questions. So for the first one, one of those books that I mentioned I maybe would have not read otherwise was surprisingly the Harry Potter series. Obviously looking back on it, how could I not? But, as a young reader, those books are very daunting in size. I think the biggest Order of the Phoenix is somewhere near 800-900 pages. So, it's an incredibly large book. But I found myself enjoying it a lot to the point that I would consider myself a fan of the series as a whole nowadays.
Good.
For your second question, I would say for an influential book, I would go to Amy Tan's The Bonesetter's Daughter. This was actually a book that we read back in high school sort of as an independent read. So not everyone in the class read it, but I chose it personally to read. And for a brief synopsis, it tells the story of a woman kind of in the same situation as me. She's a second generation Asian American who has a mother also that came over from China, sort of has those deep ties back to her homeland. And she has to, sort of struggle with the idea of where she lies in relation to her mother and sort of where the relationship stands as a whole.
Wow. Speaking of people, have there been people or teachers or other people who've been particularly influential in your life?
Oh, of course.
Inspiring type?
Of course. First and foremost, I would say, of course, my parents. I've been fortunate enough to have two wonderful parents who have, made just about every sacrifice that they can to have better provided for me. Outside of that, though, I think one of the biggest influencers has to have been my Spanish teacher slash student council sponsor. Her name is Beth Smith. She's actually still teaches here at Independence. And she is just a fantastic person, a fantastic teacher, a fantastic mentor. You know, she has this sort of personality about her that just makes her very welcoming, someone that you can really trust. And I think especially in high school, you know, of course, I think everyone has their growing pains of sorts going through. Myself, no exclusion to that. And, you know, it was very comforting and reassuring to sort of have that, you know, shoulder to cry on if and when I needed it.
Yeah. And the continuity throughout your high school career.
Oh, of course. Well. You know, sort of talking about now here in our current pandemic times, up at the University of Kansas, they are doing hybrid classes. So some classes are in person, some classes are online, some are a mix of the two. And one of the things that I've kind of forgotten going through high school for 4 years is how foreign everything can be, starting new again. You know, it's a bit of a culture shock, if you will, going up and, you know, not knowing any of all of your professors and maybe only a handful of people in your classes. Again, especially because of the pandemic, you know, it's hard to make those personal connections. And yeah, going back to Mrs. Smith, you know, having that person there steady for you for all 4 years of high school, it's something, again, that I'm very fortunate for.
It's probably also somewhat shocking to be at KU in itself, because there are probably more students at KU than we have in Independence.
Yes, for you know, I don't know if you've discussed this prior, but for relativity's sake, Independence High School has maybe what is it, about 800-900 students, maybe a little less than that even. And University of Kansas is, you know, somewhere north of 25,000. So, you know, a single one of my classes at times may have had more people in it than my entire graduating class.
Wow, that's got to be different.
Yeah.
Can you share with us any books or ways that we might go about acquiring more knowledge of the Chinese people, your culture? Are there books? Are there websites? How can we go about better understanding people who are different than us?
I think
maybe not even necessarily Chinese, but anyone who's different.
Right.
How's the right way to approach that?
You know, I think maybe the simplest way, and, you know, I don't want to call it the right way, of course, you know, I think many things would fit that moniker. But I think, you know, right now in our digital age, the best way to do that is to just immerse yourself as much as possible. You know, there are an endless number of free resources out there. You know, YouTube, Google, Wikipedia, you know, things much more nuanced and specific than even those. And I think just by, you know, taking that first step and be willing to learn about a culture other than yours is a great first step.
Whether it's a book or whether it's on the web.
Of course. I only bring up the web, right? Because of, you know, right now especially in-person things are much harder to do. So ebooks would fit into that too. But then I would say outside of these current times to go and immerse yourself in person as much as possible. You know, it doesn't have to be traveling abroad to China or some other nation or culture that you're interested in, but even local events. I know, kind of going back up to KU, I am part of the Asian American Student Union, which, as the name implies, is Asian American students on campus kind of coming together, discussing their experiences. And one of the things we put on recently was a Taste of Asia night. So we, you know, invited socially distanced and, you know, in a limited capacity, but people to come try not just Chinese food, of course, but other Asian American type foods, Korean, Japanese, those sorts of things. And, you know, those are the types of experiences I think, you know, there's not a lot of pressure. These are very welcoming events that are designed specifically to kind of bring people into the fold and inform them of the culture. And I think really those are the sorts of events I think, you know, that people shouldn't be fearful of, that they should be willing to and even encouraged to participate in.
Good. Do you have any additional thoughts or things you'd like to pass our way as far as reading goes, or anything else you want to talk about?
I think sort of building on that last idea I was talking about, something that I think I sort of realized coming from a rural community. Nowadays we talk a lot about diversity, right? We want
Right.
increased diversity, whether it be gender, sexuality, gender orientation, ethnicity. And I think something that I didn't quite realize going up to KU is just how real those metrics are. We talk about those things, of
Right.
course, right? We want those things. But when you come from, a rural community like this, you kind of forget how limited diversity really is. Going up to KU, I expected to meet new people, right?
Right.
But you kind of forget when you're at your high school, when maybe one or two kids in a class of 20 or 30 are people of color, and then you go to a university class and maybe 50, 60, 70% of the people are people of color. And it's sort of eye-opening, you really come to understand that you are part of this bigger world,
world.
of so many people different than you, with different ideas, different beliefs, and that it's kind of awe-inspiring in a way.
It's probably good to start practicing diversity, reaching out to others while you're still here, to prepare yourself for going out in the big world, because it is different, and there are people in the United States from all over the world. So I have one final question for you, Samson. How do you want to be remembered someday? Far distant future, how would you like to be remembered?
I think a younger me, not too many years ago, would have told you that I wanted to be remembered as this great person. I think the way I would have described it was, I want a Wikipedia page about me. I want someone 100, 200, 300 years from now to go back and find this page of my accomplishments, of great things that I did to contribute to society. In recent years, though, I think that's changed. I think, and this is sort of picking up one of the mantras my father liked to use a lot, which was, just be a good person. I want to be remembered, it doesn't have to be by the hundreds or the thousands. I want to be remembered by, my friends, my family, my wife and kids. I want to be remembered by them as being a good influence in their life and someone they could be proud of.
Yeah, and I'm sure your father is. I knew your dad, and he was quite a man. So thank you very much for being here with us today, Samson.
Of course.